Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to our Finance in Michigan Ross webinar. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Michael Lippert. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission here at Ross. My connection to Michigan goes back a long ways. I actually grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and came to Ann Arbor sight unseen for undergrad, and I really fell in love with this place. So those of you listening in big cities around the world know that it's quite easy to make a transition to Ann Arbor, and we all love it here. And my wife was also a Ross MBA, not a finance person at all, so she didn't have a ton to contribute as I was helping put this together, but she had incredible experience, and we're excited to be here today. And I'm excited because I'm joined by three wonderful second-year students to help share why finance at Ross is really great. We have a lot going on here at Ross. Before we get started, some of you listening might have recently applied in round one. We're excited to dig into your application. Interview invitations will come out later this month. And for those of you who do get some good news, we hope to see you on campus for an interview day in November. And we have our second round deadline coming up the first week of January. So this won't be a webinar about admission stuff per se, but you can always follow up with me directly if you have any questions. We're also excited to kick off our Women in Leadership Conference tonight, so very excited about that. As we dive into this, I just thought it would be helpful as a general at a macro level to go over some things that we feel makes Ross really different. You're kind of going to hear these three themes over and over today in some of the examples we talk about, and there's a reason for that. These are the things that we see as kind of our calling card at Ross. We are the premier experience-driven or action-based learning school. It's what we believe in. It's sort of become a buzzword now. We know lots of schools are doing something similar, but we feel really strongly that if you're somebody that likes to be out in the field, working with real companies, working on real business challenges, that the best way to learn business is by doing business. So you'll probably hear some of those examples today, but that's really what we're about. So if that appeals to you, keep learning about Ross in that way. We're also an incredibly tight-knit community here at Ross. There's a lot of ways to describe that. You're going to hear some of them today, but the two ways I'll highlight is one, I think, finance can be seen as a pretty competitive landscape and a really stressful recruiting process at times. And I think you'll hear a lot today about how invested second-year students and the Ross Network are in helping you navigate that process. And that's really where having a strong community around you comes into play. I'll also mention that I think being a smaller town, a college campus, Ross is really known as one of the very most immersive programs. There's a lot of emphasis on co-curricular experiences, skill development, and leadership development. I think it's more than just your core classes in the finance space that help you become really successful. It's also developing some of those other skills. And I think it's a real focus for a lot of our students here at Ross, and we'll talk about some of that today as well. Lastly, we say go blue, go anywhere quite often here. Go blue is our excitement about the school and sports. Sometimes it's something you might hear said to you anywhere around the world if you're wearing Michigan gear. But you really can go anywhere. We have the biggest alumni network in the world. And I know when my wife was researching schools, I think the only piece of advice I had in the process is that I wanted her to get an MBA that was sort of geographically agnostic and really strong around the country and the world. I didn't want us to be tied to one region of the country. And I think you'll see as we dive into some of the employment stats later that really comes through, including in the finance space. It was pretty amazing as I was looking at the 2018 stats, how spread out that was. So we'll talk about that more in a bit. Just at a high level, for the agenda today, we'll go over some of the outcomes in the finance space. We'll talk about some of the different careers and sort of silos, as we call them here at Ross, in the finance space. And then we'll talk about sort of three buckets of different career support that you have. Of course, some of that comes from the Career Development Office, but there's also the Finance Club and your MBA students and classmates, particularly second years. And then we'll talk about some of the academic pieces that help make the finance experience great. And as I mentioned in the chat, we will absolutely leave time for questions as much as possible. So feel free to submit questions throughout so when we get started, we can cover those. With that, I want you to get to know the students who are here in the room with me because they're going to be a big part of the next hour. So Ada, do you mind kicking us off and sharing a little bit more about you and your background?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really happy to share my experience in the first year and just perspective on the Ross as a whole. Originally from Russia, spent most of my pre-MBA career in the public accounting sector, as you can see. And as I was looking for MBA programs, I kind of considered three main criteria. One, I was looking for a strong finance program because I have had background in accounting, really wanted to expand beyond that. Second, I was looking for a school that has really strong connections with the companies that I was excited about and having those recruiting opportunities. And three, just having worked in small teams as part of my pre-MBA job, I really realized that quality of your experience most of that comes from quality of your peers and just kind of your relationship with those peers. And I really was looking for a strong community. And so Ross with that was a very natural choice for me. My MAP was in San Francisco with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. We worked on electric vehicles projects. And the objective of that was to evaluate opportunities to invest capital in the EV value chain, which was a really interesting project. I, in fact, was able to incorporate all of the disciplines that we learned in the first year, from marketing to finance to strategy and even operations. It was a great experience in terms of real-life application of those disciplines. And for my summer, I recruited for corporate finance and chose Microsoft. Had a chance to work with a team that supports Peggy Johnson, who is the EVP of Business Development at Microsoft. Look her up. She's incredible, very inspiring leader. So that was an amazing experience. Again, I did both finance and strategy and really incorporate all my learnings from the first year of Ross.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. My name's Lucy Cantwell. I'm a second-year student here. Before Ross, I was the executive director of a family foundation doing grant making and impact investing. And although we were working with transactions, because we were primarily an impact-first organization, we were making our decisions based on our idea of the kind of capacity for social or environmental impact of the projects we were looking at. So I wanted to go to business school to develop the technical skills that I didn't have a chance to kind of deploy in my role. And I wanted, when I was looking at schools, I wanted a chance, because I was going to be shifting from the nonprofit to the for-profit space. I wanted a school that would allow me to kind of test out the skills I was learning in class in the real world before I got to my internship. So the experiential learning of Ross was far and away kind of the biggest driver for me when I was looking at schools. And we'll get in a little bit later into kind of how I was able to tailor my first year so that I had those opportunities. I decided to recruit for investment banking. And so I was at Citi in New York this summer in their retail coverage group, where I'll be going back. It was a great experience. And again, making such a big career change couldn't have happened without the resources and examples that we'll talk through the next couple of minutes, or 45 minutes. And then my MAP was getting kind of the other side of a transaction experience. I was working with a automotive supplier in Shanghai who had recently made a number of different acquisitions across the automotive supply chain. And so we were helping them develop a post-merger integration plan so they could realize the benefits that had motivated these transactions. So getting to see kind of the inner workings of how does a company, what does it look like from the inside once a company's made an acquisition, of the type that I'll be doing in my full-time role.
Thank you. Last but not least.
All right, guys and girls. Sorry, my name's Aditya Badranath, an MBA second year as well. And actually, much like Michael, I was actually an undergrad here, studied math and econ a long time ago. Before Ross, I worked at Bank of America in New York in the interest rate side. Did a couple things, quantitative analytics, sales, even for a second. Kind of never had a formal business background, so wanted to get a little more education there. So kind of B school came to mind. I mean, I love Michigan. I can't say anything else other than that. That's why I came back. But on top of that, the community at Ross is really something special. I've heard the professor described it as Ross is the one of the schools where the sum of the parts is much, much bigger than you think. Like, people really work together. They believe in each other. They help each other out. I saw it in my time on campus, and I was like, this is exactly where I want to be. For my MAP, I was at Sunlight in Toronto. It was a project for people with a lot of finance background, but the whole big picture was much more in that. Involved a lot of product strategy, a little bit more about how do you really talk to prospective clients about these kinds of views in a space that's confusing and also fascinating. It was a great experience, and I was there for 6 weeks, so that was pretty cool. And then for my summer, I was actually in Vanguard in Malvern, Pennsylvania, in the investment management side, which is where I'll be recruiting.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us here today. And we're lucky to have such accomplished students, but also sort of varied across the different areas of finance. And part of that's on purpose because there's a lot of different things in the finance landscape. We'll get back to everybody, all of the students in a little bit. I just wanted to quickly cover sort of a Cliff Notes version of some of the career outcomes in the finance space at Ross. The 2008 employment report is actually not released yet. It will be coming out in the next few days. So you can go through it in detail in a little bit, but I just wanted to point out some key things in the finance space that I noticed that I think are really important. 17% of the Ross class went into finance in 2018. That's more than 60 full-time offers in the class. It's actually the third largest industry at Ross, so definitely have a cohort of folks who are really passionate about finance around you. Investment banking is actually up a little bit from before, close to now 9%, which is so more and more interest in that space. You can see really meaningful compensation statistics here and how they compare to other industries in the employment report, but they're clearly really meaningful and help, I think, give you a sense of the ROI on the investment here. And they're extremely competitive amongst other top 10 business schools. And then one of the things that I thought was most intriguing as I went through the outcomes was that, of course, New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco were the most common destinations and the most seen, and that's naturally in this industry. But I was also really excited to see Charlotte, Minneapolis, Denver, Houston, and Dallas, among many other cities around the country represented in the finance space. So it really sort of exemplified this whole idea of go blue, go anywhere. And I think that's really powerful, because I remember when my wife was in school, there were so many people in our network who want to be in a certain city because of family preferences or other lifestyle preferences. So those opportunities really are available. And this is just a snapshot here of some of the great companies that were represented in the finance space and hiring Rossers for full-time employment last year. A couple of things I wanted to point out. All of the top 10 largest banks were represented in the Ross employment report last year, which is incredible. In many cases, there were multiple offers for Ross students. And when you think about the corporate finance space, which we're going to talk about in more detail in just a minute, you'll see that some of the key companies that are most attractive and some of the most desirable companies to work for, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Amex, all were hiring for corporate finance last year, which is really exciting for us. Very quickly, I want to give you a sort of a macro level snapshot of the career support in the space. And there's a lot of different opportunities. The staff, obviously career services here. We have Amari Love, who is our career development office career coach. He's a finance analyst who worked at Morningstar and Goldman Sachs, who provides coaching for all of our finance interested students. And there's also different workshops to assess your finance fit and work-life balance and help understand company culture. But there's two other prongs that I think are really important and help you understand it's a full ecosystem here to support you. And so one of those is peer coaches, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but they're MBA second-year students who did incredibly successful in their recruiting process and had great experiences over the summer, who really help walk you through the process, both as a peer coach and leading a fact group. And we'll talk about that in more detail. There's also a lot of student-led resources. So the Finance Club leads a lot of that, and I just sort of wanted you to have a snapshot here of how there's more than just one office or one person helping you throughout the process. There's many different resources. With that, Ada, do you want to give us a quick overview of the corporate finance space since you were in that over the summer?
Sure, happy to. So when I think about corporate finance function and really want to answer a question of what corporate finance is, I think about really serving a role of financial advisor to your business from the inside the company. And that includes both functional expertise, such as treasury or M&A, and business expertise, which would be something like product finance or marketing finance. And every business, has an objective of generating value in form of profits or shareholder value, et cetera. And you as a corporate finance professional there really to support that business to maximize that value. And that can include anything from, designing financial metrics and reports and help management to really understand the performance of not only a company overall, but individual business units and products. and really help to drive those valuable insights that help with decision making. So here I'd like to also take a moment to really talk about kind of the variety of different corporate finance paths that are available for rosters, but for both internships and full-time. I would say that they can be categorized in main 4 buckets. First one is rotational opportunities. So rotational programs for corporate finance usually will take between 2 and 3 years. We get an opportunity to rotate to different product groups. So a great example here would be an Amazon Finance Leadership Development Program, which recruits here on campus. So for example, you can spend 18 months in AWS supporting that unit, and then another 18 months in somewhere in advertising in another unit, which gives you a great exposure over a short period of time. The second bucket would be like function-specific roles. So as you can see in the upper left corner would be something like treasury, or maybe something more specific to Google or GM positions that are available. Third one is more of kind of combination of strategy and finance. So here you have a strategic planning or special projects. Those are also positions that are available here for all students. And the last one is more of just very specific finance roles. So you think about, for example, joining Microsoft Cloud Revenue Group and working really in that space and really developing deep technical expertise there. So that's kind of an overview of different type of positions that you can recruit for, you can develop interest in. But in fact, we have a great variety of companies as well, all the way from financial services to airlines to tech, CPG, et cetera.
Awesome. The next big silo we talk a lot about here is investment banking. Lucy, you want to give us a quick overview?
Yeah, definitely. So as Ada described, corporate finance being, kind of the liaison within a company, investment banks I see acting as the kind of intermediaries between the companies themselves and then the capital markets more generally. So it's helping companies execute on their high-level strategy, strategic initiatives, either from kind of the capital structure side of things or their business composition. Is their company made up of, growing divisions? Is that the best kind of mix within the company itself? So investment banks underwrite new debt and equity securities for the company if the company needs to raise capital via the capital markets. And obviously also help facilitate mergers and acquisitions. I think that's what people kind of most commonly think of when they think of investment banking. And then finally, they also provide just kind of more general advisory support to companies as they're thinking through the relative merits of any of these particular strategic paths. So we can get into more details later, but just kind of broadly speaking, that's the role of an investment bank.
Awesome. That's super helpful and a good overview. And then last but not least, something I think that's really growing here at Ross. Do you want to cover investment management and sort of a little bit of PE?
Sure. And actually, I like the way Lucy set it up for me. We think of ourselves as basically the guys who are trying to put capital to use in a sense. When you think about the high-level team investment management, it's generating return for clients, be it client money, your own money, that kind of thing. There's 3 kind of big breakdowns at Ross. There's the asset management side. You can think of mutual funds, hedge funds, private equity firms being in there. And their big goal is to basically find places to put money to use. They're investing capital, they're even lending, they're doing all these things to generate return, but they're also doing it intelligently. So things like the level which you go in, when you exit, and the amount of risk you're taking are important considerations. And kind of the long-term goal going there to be a portfolio manager. Another kind of aspect is sell-side research. This is kind of what the analysts at big banks tend to do. They're analyzing companies. They're basically becoming experts in a bunch of different small names and fields, and then talking to big asset managers about what they should do, provide recommendations. They're also, if you ever hear an earnings call, there are guys asking questions to make us all kind of learn a bit more about the company. And kind of the third big aspect is wealth management. In a sense, you're a very kind of specialized individual who understands a bunch of unique kind of wealthy clients, their needs, their kind of liabilities, what they're looking to do, and you're helping them make sure that they're meeting all their mandates, be it providing inheritance for their descendants or making sure they're not triggering a huge tax risk by a transaction.
Awesome. Thanks. Those are super helpful overviews, and I just wanted to take the time to do that because I think it's easy to think of finance as all the same, but as you guys well know, in how the Finance Club operates, there's a number of students here who have different interests. So I think it's really helpful to have a lay of the land like that. As we transition here, just really quickly, I see some questions coming in. I know there was a lot of text on those slides, and you might be like, oh, that's really interesting to me. I never thought of investment management being a good fit, but now I do. So the recording for this and the slides, I will be able to share later. So you can sort of take it all in now, and I promise to share that out later this week. One thing I want to cover, sort of a last bucket that's equally important in many ways, is a really quick overview of fintech. There's a lot on this slide, but I think it's on purpose, almost as a purposeful visual, to say there's an incredible amount going on in fintech right now. I think one of my favorite students last year who was moving into the fintech space pointed out in the last 4 years, there were 800 new companies started in the fintech space and like $70 billion worth of deals going on. This slide kind of gives you a snapshot. There's student loan lending, mortgage lending, capital markets, payment apps. There's so much going on, and there's a lot going on at Ross attached to this. So we have our inaugural FinTech conference this year in January, which we're incredibly excited about. And there's a number of map projects that were specifically FinTech projects. There was a map project with Verizon, working on a mobile payment app. We have a really incredible relationship with Alphabet, Google's parent company, and working with their fintech efforts abroad. So a lot of resources to work in that space if that's something you're excited about, which I know is really popular right now. As we transition a bit to the Finance Club itself, I think the Finance Club is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important resource for first-year students as they navigate the finance landscape. We're lucky that all the students here today play such an important role in the club. And Lucy, as the president, do you just want to cover a little bit some of the key resources the Finance Club offers?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, the Finance Club kind of helps guide those students interested in recruiting for either corporate finance or investment banking positions. Aditya is the president of the Asset Management Club, which is another professional club kind of more tailored to the specific industries that he talked about, but I'll focus on the corp fin and investment banking side of things for the moment. So our goal is to make sure that students have the resources that they need to be successful through the recruiting process. You can see here, there's a range of different ways we do that. Both corporate finance and investment banking have weekly education meetings. We'll kind of go through that in a little bit more detail in a moment. We have the Corporate Finance Forum, which is a great opportunity for students to start networking with companies that hire for corporate finance roles. There's Wall Street Forum. All the MBA ones that are currently recruiting for investment banking are gearing up for the Wall Street Forum the last week in October, which is normally October break, but they get to go to New York, meet with 17 different banks this year throughout the course of that week, and just kind of really kickstart their networking, the networking that's essential to ultimately getting an internship offer. And that's both facilitated by the club, managed, organized, structured by the club and by MBA2 leadership. So these students, have the opportunities, kind of get the best of both worlds. They have the opportunity to go spend time with the banks, but at this stage are not responsible. They get to kind of walk in with the support that they need to do a good job in those meetings. We do the same thing in San Francisco and Chicago for investment banking. There are other treks, certainly for other career paths, but that's what we focus on here. There's also one to New York, Chicago for private equity and kind of VC asset management. Making sure that the students have the technical skills they need and that there's enough kind of industry knowledge so that they can, again, be successful in these conversations.
Awesome. So I picked an example here. You talked about the importance of education. We just picked the investment banking silo as an example, but you kind of want to walk us through what a semester looks like.
Yeah, definitely. So everything, investment banking in particular, has a really structured recruiting process, and the banks start coming to campus really early. So I remember when I was an MBA1, again, coming in with an untraditional background, it was, I was kind of overwhelmed. I was excited about the chance to get to switch careers, but I didn't know how I was going to be successful in that or whether I would be. So these weekly education sessions that you see, kind of the example of the topics we covered this year, were absolutely central for me getting up to speed and being successful as I kind of dove into that recruiting process. So this is a weekly meeting every Sunday. All the MBA1s interested in banking come together, and it's led by 2 different MBA2s who kind of give their perspective on the recruiting process and make sure that at every stage of the process, you know exactly what you need to be doing. So right now, the MBA ones, as I said, this year are finishing up their corporate presentations. So they've gone through, how to send what the appropriate thank you note is in this particular context, how to conduct the kind of networking happy hours that are a big part of the recruiting process. And like I said, are making sure the silos, making sure that they're prepared to go to New York and have this kind of intensive recruiting gauntlet that they're going to have not next week, but the week after next. So you can see, the topics evolve as the time goes on because the recruiting process continues. And then ultimately, it's driving towards that kind of last place, that last education session, which is now that you're closed listed, what are the next steps? How do you get prepared for these interviews? And what do you need to be thinking about?
Awesome. That's a super helpful overview. And I think it's indicative, of all the clubs here at Ross really that are incredibly invested in your success. But I think in finance in particular, at least this is my perception of it, there's so much sort of stress level and competitive recruiting. And I think just the nature of there's a lot going on that having that sort of peer-to-peer support to really help you understand what knowledge is required and somebody who just went through it is incredibly helpful. And sort of in the same vein, I'd say like part 1A of this whole concept is we have the most peer coaches of any MBA program in the world here at Ross. So CDO, you see that acronym here on the slide, stands for Career Development Office. They hire and train 85 of the most successful second-year MBA students to be available as peer coaches to any of the first-year students and lend their time across all different industries and companies. So peer coaches worked at all these companies in the past year. And, I think my best way to describe it is, I think career services is great, but it's hard to scale really meaningful services to hundreds of people in a meaningful way that really help you at that level. And I just remember my wife being pretty overwhelmed in her first month or two here at Ross and trying to figure out which companies make sense for her, how this works, and what it looks like. And I just remember when she came home from an hour or 2 hour meeting with her peer coach or her fac group, it just was like this sense of relief, like I'm okay, I've got it. And there's a path here and I really understand what I should be doing. And I also think, peer-to-peer is really important, but also having it broken down to a very niche level of, I want to work at in this function, in this industry, or maybe even with this company. So if you haven't been recruiting with Amazon, but they have some finance roles you're excited about, there's probably 15 peer coaches who worked at Amazon who can really give you some insight into that. So that's what peer coaches look like, and different peer coaches lead what's called fac groups. So it's another acronym, but it's essentially an accountability team that keeps you along a path throughout the semester as you're first learning what recruiting looks like, and really helps give you a sense of what to expect, cover letters, mock interviews, the recruiters you should be talking to. So we have a sample fac group curriculum. You follow a curriculum each week of the semester. This would be like very early in September what week 2 looks like, but there's a lot going on in week 2. And Aditya, you're leading a fac group. Do you want to help walk us through this sample one and talk about, sort of what your fac group looks like on a weekly basis?
Sure. And actually, it's cool because I'm looking at this and thinking back to last year when I was in a fac group for actually investment banking, and kind of my fac group leader was incredible about this stuff. But the way you think about it is this is a little bit tailored to banking, so let's speak to that just because it's easier to go through. Is that you get a lot of kind of information from last week. When banks come on campus, they'll tend to communicate their experiences and their thoughts kind of through the silo, and it passes to your fac group leader. So the fac group leader will kind of talk to you at a high level about what you got, what we did well, what we kind of need to look out for. It's really it's a great feedback experience. It's a small circle of 4 or 5 people at this point, or some of my best friends, because we've been meeting every single week, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's why it's nice to have people, it's like a therapist helping you through the process.
Actually, at one point when you get stressed out, that is actually the way it goes. You kind of have people who really get it too. They're in the same thing you are, and they're just really open, helpful time. But kind of going back to it, so the start's usually kind of what went on last week, what do we need to think about? It's kind of a review. At this point, we've been going through our Odysseys, and we've been starting to think about some technical questions. So my faculty leader might ask, hey, Lucy, could you go through your Odyssey for me just on the spot, just to make sure you're comfortable doing it? Then go, hey, Ada, how about, this interesting concept? Have you thought about it yet? Because you're going to be asked questions about this. So So it's kind of in a sense priming you. It's not hostile. It's actually really kind of friendly, but it gets your kind of gears flowing in a way you need to be. On top of that, generally speaking, on each week there'll be kind of banks coming to campus. So our faculty leader usually knows them because he's spoken to them last year. He's kind of telling you what they do, kind of when they're here, who you should be talking to. If you have a certain industry interest, he's more than helpful to or he or she is more than happy to kind of guide you towards certain people he thinks it's important for you to talk to. And in the end, usually kind of wrap up, we think about what are concerns the actual fact groups are having, like what have they heard, what have they seen, what are they worried about. And as the process goes along, the faculty leader is super responsive to kind of each person's needs. Like if you need time to decide, he or she's more than willing to actually meet up with you and kind of help out as much as they can.
Awesome. And so I saw a quick question come in. I should just mention you can pick the fact group you want to be a part of, and if a couple of weeks in and after you get a sense of certain things, you can always make a switch and join a different fact group if you think that's a better fit. But I saw a lot of heads nodding around the room and a lot of like, oh my gosh, yes, my fact group. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add something real fast.
The only thing I wanted to kind of highlight and emphasize, Michael mentioned earlier about the kind of complexity of recruiting for finance. But I think the huge benefit of a fact group and of the finance club in general, and I would say this is true across Ross, across the board at Ross, which is the congenial and supportive nature of the students. Like that sounds like a talking point, and it sounds generic and like it can't possibly be true, especially, investment banking is, kind of stereotypically considered to be one of the most competitive industries. But I 100% second the fact, like, I felt like I could lean on my fellow classmates for every single thing. We're all prepping each other. If someone came on campus and we were all, scheduled at different times for informational interviews and someone was giving technical questions, we would tell each other, heads up, this is what you're going into, to make sure that everyone is successful kind of across the process. It'd be easy to keep that information to yourself and, in hopes maybe that you look better compared to somebody else, but that's just not the way things work here. And I think it makes the experience so much more manageable for everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is a very personal note for me and not my admissions hat on, but I just remember like when my wife was going through the process, how many of like her classmates, like consultants, said the same thing. And when my wife was going through marketing recruiting, MBA recruiting can feel like a numbers game sometimes. It's like, oh, this company is only hiring so many from this school, and it's just this whole idea. It's a little corny at times, but this whole idea of like a rising tide brings up all ships, and that's you see that at Ross all the time, and it's really compelling for all of us here to feel that. So with that, we'll sort of transition to the last bucket we spoke of academic preparation and what that looks like. I'll just point out a few quick things at a high level. There's a rigorous core curriculum here that walks you through a really like general management curriculum of all parts of business. We've always been a general management school. I think it's a really important part of Ross. We're incredibly strong and known in many different areas, and I think we care more not just about a specialization, but really developing leaders who have a cross-functional nature, and it's one of the things Ross students are really known for, so you can get that out of the core curriculum. There's also a very special part of the curriculum called Fast Track in Finance, which is tailored for all of our students who are excited about finance to help prep them for the summer. We're going to go through that in detail in just a moment, but I want to make sure we highlighted that. And then the last thing I want to point out at a high level is the multidisciplinary action project, or as you keep hearing it, MAP. You heard about all the students in the rooms, a sampling of their 3 projects. On our website, you can see all of the MAP projects from the last 3 years. I just think it's an incredibly cool way, looking at it through a couple of different lenses. One is, if you're a career changer and you've never had experience in finance, it's essentially like getting a second internship in the finance space, which you can't overstate how important that is as a dry run for your internship. Or if you're sort of a lifelong finance person, you're going back into it, but you just sort of want a safe space or a comfort zone to work with a real company in a different industry and explore it, or just sort of a different company culture. It's an incredible way to actually do that out in the field for 7 weeks in a consulting project. It's also a great way to get a global experience. All the travel and costs associated with MAP is included in tuition. So just a few things to keep in mind. The most important thing on this slide, though, or at least to this topic, is definitely the Fast Track in Finance. So we have a visual on the screen, but there's a lot going on here. Ada, you went through Fast Track in Finance last year. Can you kind of walk us through what the program's all about and how it helped you over the summer?
Sure. Actually, Fast Track in Finance was a program that was a big selling point for me coming to Ross. You start with applying for that program maybe in the late June or so to indicate your interest. And the reason for that is that this program is designed to really prepare you well to not only have accelerated finance learning, but also come into school on the fall A and already have some finance learning kind of, in your expertise. And so it requires waiving out of accounting. So I'm a CPA, so I had an automatic waiver. However, a school also provides resources for students to help with kind of a exam pass in, a week or so. So the second part of that will be a 9-week course over the summer that students take, and it's taught by a great professor. Really exciting experience for me. Just kind of slowly prepares you over the summer. You take, a few hours a week, listen to lectures, do some very basic kind of calculations. So when you come in fall A, you really already have those concepts kind of down. And when you pass that course, you then kind of add it to one of the two groups. One is the Fast Track Finance, Fast Track 1, and then Fast Track 2, depending on kind of what experience you're coming in with. And I think that's a great separation, because this track is designed not only for students that have finance experience and only want to be in finance, but also for students that may not have as much experience in finance and may not be going in the finance career, but really interested in learning about it. So I was part of the First Track Finance, and I would highly recommend it for anybody who's both interested in finance and not, because it really prepares you to not only succeed in your internship and being really a good contributing member of your MAP team, but most importantly for the interviews. Interviews usually happen, somewhere in the early winter, and going through both finance and valuation in the fall helps tremendously to really have those financial concepts down and be able to confidently answer technical questions and really speak about financial performance of companies in an intelligent way.
Yeah, I saw lots of nodding going around the room again about how helpful Fast Track was. So I don't know if anybody wants to add in any experiences.
This is Lucy. Just briefly, to Ada's point, I didn't have a finance background, and I did Track 1 as well. And so the kind of online course that she mentioned that you take over the summer, that was the best place for me to kind of dip my toes in the water and see, I think I might be interested in this, but is this really something that I like? Is this really something I think I could be good at? And so I got to kind of do this online module, go through, like Ada said, the basic concepts and kind of validate this hypothesis that I had that, I think I do really like this. And I can't overstate the point that, getting these, so normally you take finance your second quarter as a part of the core, but Fast Track allows you to take it in your first quarter instead. So you hit the ground a little bit faster than your peers who might not be recruiting as quickly, and it just helps prepare for those technical interviews.
Awesome. So you go through, like you can see here, your first year is pretty well laid out for you. There's some room for some electives, but there's like a science behind it. It prepares you for the summer. You apply the core concepts to MAP. The second year you come back and it's entirely design your own path. You can even take classes outside of Ross at any of Ross's over 100 top 10 graduate degree programs at U of M. But there are some key electives that I keep hearing from students, whether it be the students in the room or other finance students, that I think are really popular. I don't know if you guys want to highlight one or two of your favorites, whether it's on the slide or something else.
Sure, guys. The first one, Entrepreneurship the Acquisitions on the slide, it's kind of a class that really speaks to the Ross network. It's actually taught by a private equity professional based in Detroit who is actually a Ross MBA. He kind of comes in every week, teaches a little bit about some of the deals he's done and how you think about an actual private equity deal. But on top of that, he also has other private equity kind of investors come in who are also coincidentally Ross MBAs. So you get to see a little bit of the strong Ross network, but it's incredible to get experience, some kind of experience with someone who's actually done this for a living. And on top of that, there's actually professional opportunities that kind of arise from taking a class like that, where he's able to connect you with kind of people in the industry who are looking for analysts or associates or even starting their own funds.
That's awesome.
Great. I actually would love to share kind of my experience taking the accounting course that is listed on the slide, the corporate financial reporting. People a lot of times ask me, Ada, you're a CPA, why are you taking a financial reporting class? And it's a valid question. However, the professor that teaches that class is absolutely brilliant, not only by obviously the professional achievements, but most importantly in how the class is designed and how it's delivered. So not having an accounting background doesn't necessarily translate into having a really good understanding of everything that's going on in the business world today. So when you open the Wall Street Journal, for example, and reading an article, it really may take you a little bit longer time to really digest all the technical language and really understand what's going on in a nutshell. And this class is amazing because every class we review actual real life cases from Wall Street Journal, real companies, and understanding those kind of financial reporting concepts in a very easy way. I, in fact, had a technical interview earlier this week, and I used 50% to cover my answers with the help of that class, and I just highly, highly recommend it to everybody. And the last one that is listed is my personal favorite class that is part of the Fast Track Finance. So if you look back in that slide that we had earlier, Winter A looks blank, but you do have an opportunity to take that class. This class is a FIN 621, and I recommend you guys look it up and read about the professor. He is absolutely amazing. So this class is focused on kind of emphasis on debt and equity management and just corporate capital structure of corporation overall. And I got to use concepts that I learned in that class during the summer. So my project, very important part of my project was not only like modeling kind of the financial metrics for the business partners, but most importantly, convincing them to really buy into this project. And I really utilized concepts that I learned about capital structure and capital allocation to apply to actual like Microsoft, business strategies. And I just had a cool experience doing that.
Awesome. That's super helpful. You can review all electives offered at Ross on the website as well as all faculty bios. So definitely encourage you to do that. I'll also link it with the recording so you can have access to that. But that's really helpful to get a sense of, I think, some of the more helpful classes or exciting classes for those interested in finance. Really quickly, I want to talk about sort of co-curricular resources at Ross. As I mentioned at the start of the hour, I think one of the most powerful things about Ross is how invested the whole student body is in developing their skill set outside the classroom and also their leadership skills. One thing I want to highlight is the Data Insight and Analytics group. We actually just kicked off a data analytics concentration, but this group actually embodies the action-based learning concept, working with local companies or organizations like the Detroit Police Department or Ford Motor Company with real data sets, presenting real findings. I think it's a great way for folks to get more comfortable with big data. And then one of the things, if you've done any research about Ross, you've probably heard a lot about our student-led investment funds. There's over $10 million invested here by Ross students specifically, and two of our panelists were part of funds. So you guys can highlight maybe the funds you were a part of or one of your takeaways from that experience quickly.
Sure. I'll speak to the Maize and Blue Endowment Fund. It's honestly the best professional practice I've seen for a job as being a research analyst and portfolio manager. We basically kind of form teams and pitch stocks to an investment committee, which is the other students. And you get really firsthand practice at kind of how do you analyze a company, how do you value it. But on top of that, it's also the discussion that occurs is phenomenal. Like you have other kind of really intelligent, both undergrads and MBAs, kind of quizzing you about what are the risks or mitigants you haven't thought about to your thesis.
Great. And this is Lucy. I was a part of the Social Venture Fund last year. And so, like I said, coming in with an untraditional background, I wanted to make sure that there were opportunities for me to operationalize what I was learning in the core before I got to my internship. So the work that the Social Venture Fund does, which is investing in for-profit businesses focused on social or environmental impact, was very similar to the work that I was doing before school. But as I mentioned, we didn't bring the kind of technical analysis to bear in my prior role. So I saw SVF as an opportunity to test that, again, before the summer. So I, as a part of the fund, we screen a number, hundreds of deals, narrow it down, and then decide on a select few to do diligence on to present to the fund. And so I raised my hand during due diligence and said, I want to own the financial model of evaluating this company. I want to be the one that projects their cash flows, that articulates, do we think this can be profitable in the future? And so everyone was like, great, you've learned these things, you want to do this, why don't you take that and run with it? So I got to exactly do what I set out to do when I came to Ross, which was kind of test, again, build these skills before the real world hits in the summer.
Awesome. That's a really good overview, and everybody gets excited about the funds. I think it's one of the most meaningful co-curricular experiences. And again, sometimes I think as a prospective student, it's a little bit hard to visualize action-based learning, or you think like, oh, there's this math project, and then the rest of my time is going to be 2 years of lectures. And it's really not. There's so many opportunities to actually have real-life experiences to work on your skills, as Lucy shared. And I think it's very much what we get so excited about when we keep saying action-based learning. There's also, by the way, there's now 7 or 8 funds at Ross that you could be a part of. We highlighted some of the most popular or the biggest funds, but I know the real estate fund's really popular with a lot of finance students. There's also one of the newest funds that I think is really cool is the Founders Fund. So it's Ross students investing directly only in companies started by University of Michigan students or alums. So there's a lot of great ways to be a part of funds here and have that experience. Just as a last thing, and sort of a good concluding note, as something we all get excited about is the alumni network here at Michigan. We do have the largest alumni network in the world, over 580,000 alums. And I always remind people, I think a cool thing about Ross and the Michigan network is there's no differentiation between like you're an MBA alum and you're a BBA alum, so we're not going to talk. And I think some of that sometimes happens at other schools, but the Block M is the Block M. And Michigan, it gets everybody excited. And there's so many examples of businesses that were started by an engineering alum with a business school student, or a BBA who kicked off a company with an MBA. And so it's pretty awesome to see that. And it's something you can really take advantage of, and the power of off-campus recruiting and what a Go Blue means at the end of your email and getting a response. And Michigan alums are incredibly passionate. I'll also quickly mention there's a program called Alumni Advantage where you can take any of our executive education classes. They cost about $10,000 to the public and are often offered to Fortune 100 companies all around the world, and a really popular offering of the school and something we're known for. Those classes are all free for any alums of our program. We're the only school that does something like that. And so it's sort of an investment in your education for a lifetime. And if there's, if you're making a transition in your career, or you maybe inherit a really large team that you need to manage and want to brush up on some of your leadership skills or things along those lines, those offerings exist, which I think is pretty fantastic. I don't know if any of you guys want to share an interaction with an alum you had during recruiting, or sort of like what that looked like for you over the summer, maybe alums who helped you out at your company. I know that's something I hear all the time.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm glad you asked this question, because as I was kind of going through my admissions process with Ross, as part of my visit, I've met with a current student at the time, second year MBA, who shares his experience interning at Microsoft. And at that time, I was really far away from making my decision about internships and even like evaluating my choices, my options. But going through the process and really staying in touch with that person after they graduated and moved to Seattle and started work at Microsoft, that really kind of we kept in touch. And after going through the recruiting process, that really helped me to make my final decision in terms of accepting Microsoft internship offer. And not only that, but also setting up a really good kind of platform as I started my summer to meet with other Rossers and just have that support from that person throughout my summer.
Awesome. Thank you. We hear that story again and again, so it's pretty great. So with that, we definitely have time for like 10 minutes of questions. I'm going to ask one that did come in. I could have predicted it. I would have bet on it. It comes up all the time, but I get this on the road all the time. It's like, I want to work in finance, often in New York, maybe in San Francisco, but shouldn't I be on the coast recruiting? And so, I just was wondering, like, how did you guys navigate that? What does travel look like? Or do you think there's a difference being here in the Midwest compared to, somewhere in a city?
I don't really. And I think so yes, I spent, a fair amount of time going to New York, kind of in the throes of the recruiting process last year. That is, networking is a huge, to kind of the last point about the strength of the alumni network. Even in these most traditional, I think sometimes people think of kind of alumni connections as being most important for off-campus jobs searches, but I think they're central to on-campus searches as well. So I was flying to New York every week, meeting with Ross alums at each of, all of the top 10 banks, building those relationships. But the benefit, I think, of being a little bit removed is that you get to, again, be going through this process with a community of peers that you all, spend time together, like that you have a support structure. I think if I'd been based in New York, it would have been really easy. Yes, the banks would have been maybe a little bit more accessible, but I wouldn't have had the peer support because everyone would have had their own lives that they kind of scattered back into when, classes were over or when club meetings were done. So being here kind of gave the best of both worlds. The proximity is still really present. It's easy to get to, that doesn't change your ability to network with people on the coast. But then you get the added benefit of having a peer network that will be just as important for your long-term professional development as kind of those who graduated a couple years ahead of you.
I can also speak to the fact that it's incredible how much Ross alumni want more Ross people at their firms. Like there's no other way to put it. Like at the big banks, at hedge funds, at mutual funds, the first thing people say is, how do we get more Ross people?
Yeah.
So there's almost an outreach pulling you back into your city of choice, be it New York, be it Chicago, be it SF. And I would also want to say that Chicago is an incredible finance city. The opportunities there are outstanding. And we have kind of had the best of both worlds, able to get to Chicago and New York pretty easily.
Yeah, and I think, there's sort of like a Michigan mafia in these cities, and they're loud and proud. I used to work in alumni relations for the university, and it amazed me how many Michigan folks would be in New York or in Chicago. And you see it in our class outcomes in that, 20% of the class will go to New York, and then 20% will go to Chicago. And there's also, like 25 to 30% on the West Coast. And so you really can go anywhere, and it's sort of easy to do that. Another question, I see a question sort of sounding like this, and I remember, I think, Ada, I saw you at orientation leading a panel about finance recruiting, and there are people in the room who are doing other things, and how do you handle both, and what does the timing look like? And there's investment banking recruiting, there's corporate finance recruiting. Maybe I'm interested in both. Can you just quickly walk through the timing of when recruiting happens, what's the important times of the year? Because it's hard, I think, for a prospective student to visualize it.
Absolutely. And I think we as a finance club, we obviously have silos for corporate finance and investment banking, but we really try to work close together to make sure that students have the best opportunity, the best support if they want to consider both. So my job as the VP of Corporate Finance Club is to set people for success, whether corporate finance is their plan A recruiting or plan B recruiting. And so recruiting process usually for corporate finance starts around early December with resume drop deadlines, and then moves into kind of interviewing from mid-January through mid-February. That said, investment banking is mostly comes to kind of the end of the recruiting cycle, Lucy, if I'm correct. So there is definitely an opportunity to have that overlap, and with the right support, which Ross absolutely has, and our peer coaches can provide, to explore both opportunities, and that applies to both investment banking and corporate finance.
I'll also say that, the skills that you need to develop as you're recruiting for any finance role are so transferable to other potential options. Like, yes, as I think all of us would agree that one of the big takeaways of an MBA experience is prioritization. There's so many opportunities, and as much as you want to, you literally cannot do all of them. So you do have to make sure that you have, some kind of point of view as you're going into the recruiting process. But if this is where you start and you get to test these out and build these skills, you can bring those to bear in other interviews, really, really easily and other classes. And I think, it's kind of eminently transferable.
Awesome. So one thing I wanted to ask, and actually a question came in just like it, so it's perfect to think about, I think 92 or 93%, I think it is in 2018 of Ross graduates were career switchers, right, of either industry or function. And some career switches are really popular or really obvious, but my sense is from talking to prospective students all year and from talking to some of you about your path that finance is a little more like, I might have experience in it, or I know I'm going into it, and it's a little harder to visualize what that switch looks like. So I don't know, Lucy, maybe this is most directed for you. You're the biggest career switch in the room, but how did you know finance was for you, or what works as a career switcher?
Yeah, so when I thought about what I liked about my job before Ross, it was that I was working at the intersection of strategy and finance. I got to kind of see both sides of the table, evaluating ideas for their merits, but also figuring out whether or not they were executable. And initially, I, candidly wrote all my business school applications, came to Ross thinking I was going to go into consulting because I felt like that would be the best way for me to kind of home in on those strategy skills, and get that transition, get that broad kind of cross-functional perspective of working across companies from a professional services role. But as I dug more into kind of what the opportunities really were to allow me to stay at the intersection of strategy and finance, obviously kind of pursuing and exploring the more finance side of those things was a natural place for me to look. And I wasn't kidding when I said that Fast Track was the place that I got to validate and kind of test that hypothesis. It was the summer before my first year. It wasn't high stakes yet. I got to just kind of see, do I think this stuff is interesting? And it was through that process. I don't know that I would have been able to kind of take that plunge without that kind of baby step experience of getting to test it out. But once I kind of took a step back and thought about what do I like about the job that I'm leaving and what types of things do I want to optimize for, it became pretty clear that this was an exciting opportunity and that Ross would give me the resources I needed to, be confident through this super big career switch.
Awesome. I think that's a great overview, and we'll actually end on that note just because of time, but I think it's a really nice transition to the end of this and saying like Lucy's framework feels like actually really good fit for almost evaluating your career path or business schools overall, right? Like it's okay to change and it's okay to have sort of like a certain vision or skill set, but that'll ebb and flow over time. So as you listen, like these webinars, I think there's a lot of competing interests for your time right now in terms of putting your application together, learning about different schools. But I think things like this and spending the time to learn about career paths and experiences will really help you put that together. So in that vein, we have many other webinars for different career interests coming up, but also ways to learn more about the school. I'll also mention thank you to all of you, and your experiences were incredibly helpful. I think I looked this up before the webinar today, and there were like 35 student ambassadors from the Finance Club on our website. You can filter either by Finance Club or by Investment Management Club or even like other career interests, whether it be like, oh, I'm going into corporate finance, maybe I'm not in the club, things like that. Lucy probably gets a ton of requests as the president, but there's a number of other people to reach out to as well that are incredibly helpful. So I encourage you to do that, and I will share a recording of the webinar and some key links about the Finance Club and some of the classes we talked about and the funds as well to help you follow up, because I know we covered a lot of information really quickly. Thanks to all of you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it, and we hope to see you here soon on campus. Go Blue.